G'day guys, welcome back to the third video in my series here about eating rutty fallow bucks. The first couple of videos have covered what the rut is and also how the condition of these bucks physically changes from the start of the rut to the end of the rut. If you haven't seen those videos, there'll be links above me or in the description below, so you can go back and watch those to be brought up to speed if you like. This video is going to go into detail about things to keep in mind once you have a rutty buck on the ground. I want to make sure I emphasize this point. I love hunting the old, mature, gnarly deer. They're the coolest trophies and in many ways often the best deer to take out of a herd because they've kind of just gone a little bit past their peak potential or performance, so it helps to make room for some of the up and coming bucks, that kind of thing. I'm not an expert in herd management by any means, but it's definitely cool to take out the oldest, gnarliest bucks, at least for me personally. Something else cool about shooting the most mature deer is they are typically bigger than the younger deer, so you get much more meat off them. These mature bucks definitely smell stronger than the younger ones, but in my experience, most of that funk is on the outside of the deer, that being in the skin and in the hair, and the meat doesn't carry anywhere near as much smell as the skin and the hair does. And it's for that reason we need to think about exactly how we are going to dress these animals out in the field.
You're going to see me dressing out a nice old deer now. I shot him with my wife's rifle on one of my favourite hills to watch during the rut. Literally the exact same hill that I shot the other old buck I mentioned in the last bit of footage in the previous video. Interestingly, I stalked this buck with my bow and I grazed him with an arrow a week prior, so it was good to see he wasn't fazed with that small injury and was holding some does and keeping other bucks at bay. I shot him with the rifle on the 24th of April, which is very late in the rut for my patch. He was a mature buck, but if you compare the condition of him to the buck I shot a month earlier with my bow, it's night and day. This part of the video is less scripted and involves me rambling on a bit while in the field. I make some similar points that I've made in the last couple of videos, but please appreciate I was out by myself and trying to do the best job I could of capturing the important moments for this video series. I'll let the footage roll in now and I hope you enjoy it.
Tripped over at the shot. Silly me didn't pay attention and keep watching him, and he actually ran off while I was watching a few other bucks and getting some video of them as they came past me, so he took some finding. I was walking in all this open stuff here, but I mean in terms of how far he's travelled, he's only travelled maybe 40 metres. It's the 24th of April. As you can see from the video there, he was still rutting fairly hard, holding a decent number of does on his scrape up on this hill here. And it's roughly 1 month since I rattled in that really old one you'll see on the videos that was absolutely covered in fat. So I'll make some comparisons between that one and this one here as we go. I'll show you how to pack this deer out. I'll show you how I pack deer out in one go. It looks fairly flat behind me, but I can't get my vehicle here because there's a steep creek to drive through. It's pretty washed out. My car wouldn't make it. So it's only going to be about a 1 kilometre pack out, which is nice because I've been hunting and cutting firewood a lot the last couple of weeks and I'm pretty busted. But it's turning into a nice day, so we may as well get to it. I'm stoked to shoot this deer for a couple of reasons. The first being, I already got a couple with my bow this rut, so I wanted to come out and maybe do it a little bit easier. And it's nice that when I do that, I can take out one that maybe has some less desirable genetic traits. Now, I don't pretend to be some fallow deer master or herd manager by any means, but it is nice to think that when you shoot a raggedy old head like this one, you're potentially doing something to improve future trophy potential. You can see here on this antler, he's missing his tray up here where it should normally be, and this one here is quite weak. And it's interesting that the buck I shot on this hill last year, almost to the day, displayed similar characteristics. But he's also got this wicked tray brow, or whatever you want to call it, coming off the side there, which looks a lot more like something a red deer would have. Besides that, he's curling in right at the tops. His coronets seem right down to the close of his skull, so I would put this at a reasonably old deer. The second reason I'm stoked to have shot this buck with my rifle is because he is one that I gave a small flesh wound to with my bow and arrow about a week or so ago. He was bedded on his scrape, and I stalked him in the open in the long grass, and I waited for ages for him to stand up, and as he did, I've come to full draw and let my arrow go, but he was very, very steeply quartering away. The arrow broke the skin, but not the gut cavity. So obviously a non-fatal hit, and he was in fine form this morning. Another interesting fact is, the last week or so, my dad and I have been watching bucks in this area, and on one of these open scrapes there was a very heavy, what I assume to be a fairly old deer, another wonky cull kind of bugger, and he was holding the most does out there consistently over about 4 or 5 days. And after I made the shot with my rifle on this one, I saw that other old cull deer, as well as another younger one with fairly good potential, actually make their way past me. I'll roll some footage in. So it just goes to show that for whatever reason, even though I'd given him a small injury, this buck seemed to be the king of the hill on this particular morning. As you can see, there's actually a heap of meat on the neck of a deer, and if you separate the shoulder from the rest of the body, it's much easier to take the entire backstrap from the hip joint all the way up to essentially up to the atlas joint at the back of the head here. The main part of the backstrap you're going to eat is kind of in here. Anything from here up kind of becomes chuck and neck meat or whatever, but it does great in a pressure cooker or a slow cooker. And certainly worth taking off because you don't really have to do anything different besides just continue your cuts all along here. So I'm going to zip this buck up the backbone here. I've got a steel in case my knife needs a touch up. I've got an extra knife as well, and I've got some water that A, I'm going to drink when it gets warm, and B, use to just rinse my hands off if I feel like they're getting a little bit funky. If you've never cut up a mature buck in the rut before, if you start with the skin on the neck, very easy to convince yourself that your knife is dull. But it's just because the skin is much, much thicker up there. And you'll see here, now that I'm down to the backbone, this should zip fairly well. Even though there's nowhere near as much rut stink along their back as there is on their face, and then their back legs in particular, I'm still going to make an effort to not let the skin keep rolling onto that backstrap there. You'll get a little bit here and there, but it's just worth taking the time. couple of things worth pointing out here, guys. First is you can see lots of little marks all over him. They're obviously from fighting. Even though there's a little bit of fat left on here, it's obviously gone a much darker color, and the layer is nowhere near what that one I shot with my bow early in the rut was. Again, it's the 24th of April now, and that one with my bow that was very fat was the 22nd of March. The other thing is I can tell that parts of this shoulder are blown up, but some are definitely salvageable, so I'm going to take the meat off here that's usable before I take the backstrap right up to the pelvis here. And that's another important point. The backstrap joins the pelvis, you can feel just here, but I've actually cut the skin away to protect what's behind the pelvis, because that is where the rump is. So in doing this, I can take off both these backstraps and then roll the buck onto his back, and I won't get the top of the back leg or the rump muscle dirty. A good point to show you is when some people take off the shoulder blade, they dig in sort of when they get to here way too much and actually nick or take off part of the backstrap with the shoulder blade. So it's worth having a look here. The shoulder muscles come sort of over top of the backstrap here. So you can come along with your knife and just gently expose. You can already see it pulling away there. So here, of course, I've just put a small nick in there, but here is the backstrap. And you can get, once you make a small slit there, you can come right in and actually separate that shoulder from the backstrap there. So it's a good tip if you just want to take the backstraps anyway to get that shoulder out of the way. I'm going to take what might be salvageable from this shoulder. There's the inside of his shoulder, which has obviously been blown to pieces. Like I said, he only ran about 40 meters, but it's amazing he ran that far even with his shoulder that broken. In any case, there could be some usable meat up on the blade here, and certainly on the top here down through the shank once I clean that up. So I'm going to put that in my bag and take it, and anything else that we don't eat can be given to some friends with dogs. Now, as you can see, we can take this backstrap right from the pelvis all the way up to this neck meat here in one piece. See, some people get really creative with the way they want to make the back of this backstrap look, and they'll cut some big circles around here or cut it off square or whatever. It's important to remember that this pelvis runs in that direction, same as here. So, you know, there's a little bit at the back here that I can't sort of scoop out with my knife, but cut it in at that angle and make sure you feel where those bones end, and that will be your guide. Another thing too is the join between these flat or short ribs and the spine isn't exactly 90 degrees. There's a little bit of a ridge along here that you need to kind of cut down here and then cut on this side with your knife to free it up. Once you get up to about here, it's much easier to make that scooping motion that we see everybody make. So essentially, once you get it started, then you can keep your roll going. Now the neck's not necessarily super difficult, but there are a bunch of other little bumps and things to follow. Rather than worry about doing an exact job, I just do the best that I can. And as you can see, once you get up to the front of the rib cage here, all this sort of starts to join what comes underneath the front of the shoulder and into the neck here. So I like to come right down and take off, and essentially once I'm hitting this spine, just wiggle my knife like this as I move it in a line and get everything that I can. Obviously leaving some meat behind, but it's hard to do a really good job with the neck. I'm using this Bushmaster from Seeker Knives for the majority of the work, and I'm just going to switch it up here to one of the feather blade models. I've used this one a fair bit and sharpened it plenty, but yeah, I've also got one of these called a Featherblade XL, which is a little bit bigger than this, but I haven't used this small one for a little while, so just to show that you don't necessarily need a really big knife to do fallow. This is more of a bushcraft knife. You can see how thick it is in the spine there, but I would be quite happy to take just this and nothing but this out fallow hunting and do the skinning, caping, butchering job confidently. Once again, don't forget about that little ridge of bones where the short ribs and the spine join here. Just float along the top of them. Once again, find the pelvis. Cut right in there. Don't need you. If you get a bit of hair on things, just scrape some of it off as you go. You can see I'm not necessarily hitting the bone really hard with my blade. I'm just giving it some wiggles just to work it away from some of the tops of those ribs. Coming away fairly clean. This part of the neck can be a bit of a choose your own adventure. A lot of people don't realise that the spine of the deer, while the ridge is up here, the spine actually runs along almost just above the centre of the neckline here. So if for no other reason, doing this gives you a really good idea about the anatomy. You'll see you come either side of what is called the nuchral ligament here, which is a very, very strong tendon that is used to basically help the deer keep their head upright. In fact, if you give it a bit of a cut, you see immediately a lot of tension is released. In any case, once again, it's just about doing the best you can. Okay guys, you can see he's starting to get a little bit stiff, which is par for the course. I'm taking a lot longer than I normally would if I wasn't filming, but that's fine. And again, you can see moving him up like this, maybe a little bit of the top of the rump will get some grit on there, but for the most part, it's going to be protected by the skin on top of the leg, which I'm about to remove now. You can see the coloration around here, around his reproductive bits. He's quite funky. So as per usual, I'm going to run my knife down here and grab and hold and skin it all back around this way, and make a conscious effort to not really touch much of the meat with my left hand until I've given it a bit of a rinse off. Another good tip here, guys, a lot of people like to run the knife straight through the Achilles, between the heel and the Achilles here, so it gives them something to hang on to. I recommend against doing that until you've skinned around in this direction. That way, even if you take something out with the skin on, even completely whole, whether it's just the legs or the whole animal, you can then hang it from here and not have to worry about skinning around a meat hook or whatever you've got it hanging from, paracord or whatever. So in my opinion and experience, best practice is to actually skin around this joint first. So it serves for two functions. The first being you get the skin away from that tendon, so it's much easier to hang it. But the second is, if you're not particularly experienced or confident with going through the ankle joint, this exposes that joint much better, and you can see where you want to hit. You can see I've well and truly exposed that tendon there, so it's going to be much easier to come through here and use this as a handle without trying to skin past there. If you were to just gut the animal and hang it up whole, all you'd need to do is skin just this section here and leave all this on to protect that part, okay? Something with these joints too, you can actually see the tendons, okay? And if you put pressure on the deer like what I'm doing, once you cut through these tendons, you'll immediately see that pressure loosen, okay? What I always tell people with getting through this joint is, if you've hit the wrong spot, no amount of pushing really hard in that spot and sawing away is going to make it any easier. You really don't need much pressure at all to go through. You can just see I'm just loosening it around there and just gently touching it with the knife. Now, yes, I'm hanging onto there with my left hand, but I'm not going to eat the Achilles tendon. The more we skin around the back here, we are going to get to where we left our last cuts on the backstrap. Just work your way around. If the animal's actually a little bit stiff, it keeps this leg from touching the next one, so it's not ideal for some things, but it is for others. The reason why we are coming so far around to the back of the deer is because that is where all the rump muscle is, and that is what so many people end up leaving behind. It's going to come right around to the absolute center of the back of that deer. You'll notice a very, very thoughtful, smart and forward-thinking hunter killed a deer at this exact location last year and left the spinal column and the pelvis attached for us to look at. One of the things I see people doing a job that could be improved upon the most is taking the back legs off the pelvis. So it's worthwhile knowing what the pelvis actually looks like, okay? As the deer lays on his back just here, propped up with my drink bottle. There's none of this, just get to the ball and socket joint and then aim for daylight, because everything between the top of the tailbone here and that ball and socket joint is the rump, okay? So it pays to know the shape of these bones, because I will come down here directly on either side of his reproductive organs, and I'll go straight down to the bone and actually have my knife in this direction while I cut away from that side of the bone, okay? This little bump here is the reason why you can't just go straight to the ball and socket joint and then aim for daylight, because you end up running into this here. So typically what I do is I cut down here, get the meat all cut away from there, go through the ball and socket joint and come underneath, hold my knife like this and actually scrape on the bone in that way, because if I'm pushing against the bone here, moving out, it's impossible for me to puncture these guts. And then once I come back along here, I'll actually come back around and under there, okay, like this, and then I just cut all that stuff away. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so let's put that idea of the shape of the pelvis into practice, okay? Again, he's a little stiff, so it's going to be a little bit harder to demonstrate in that sense, but I'm actually cutting straight down. Look at the direction my knife is pointing as I scrape that meat away, guys. It's the same as this here, okay? So again, guts here, this side of the pelvis is where you want to stay. Obviously through that ball and socket there. So now when I come underneath that ball, just like that, okay? Scrap that pelvis a little bit there, but then over here, remember that the pelvis bone goes in this direction, okay? Goes like this. So as long as we're on this side of it, we're not going to puncture these guts. So you can see now, I'm away from the socket joint. There's that little bump that I had to go around like this. So now it's just a case of keeping as close to the back as I can get. Hear the top of the pelvis there. So see the shape with that bone coming right around the top. Same as what we've got here, guys. And that there is where we said the backstrap is on this side and the rump is on this side. So that shows you really well there the angle of that bone. Okay, even looking at it like that, the angle of that bone, backstrap this side, rump this side. Okay guys, I'm just checking the state of his liver here, and it looks perfectly healthy to me. Some people do like to eat it. That's not me, I'm sorry. Sometimes my wife and I will put it in a bunch of mince, but this one's staying in the field. But again, given that he had an injury, a superficial injury that I gave him, obviously, I did just want to make sure he seemed to be in decent condition. This here, at first glance I thought might have been the liver, but it's actually just a bunch of congealed blood from inside the chest cavity where I shot him. And because it was a reasonably high shot to the top of the shoulder and the lungs, the heart is actually salvageable, so I'm going to take that. Heart's not like liver, it's not so much organy, it's more just a muscle, and I quite like eating it, so I might even have this for lunch when I get back. I'm just getting ready to haul this meat out, guys, but I thought I'd show you this hillside a little bit. Way out here, people may have seen in previous videos, I'll roll a heap of footage in here afterwards of a big scrape way out in the open that normally holds a couple of bucks and stacks of does. And there's a little bit of a scrape just here. I actually had a trail camera on this tree, and I've got pictures of a buck here facing down the hill. You can't actually see me in the photos, but I'm behind there. It was a pretty cool stalk. I didn't need a chance to shoot him. But for whatever reason, this whole hillside is a spot that the deer like to congregate. Maybe it gives them a little bit of a lookout or whatever, I'm not sure. This stick just here is the one I shot that buck behind, and you can see a lot of scraping activity all along here, all up here, and continues right around the front of this hill. It's a bit more up here. There's a heap in that scrub behind over there as well. So it's just become the hot spot that I like to hang out at, but when they're way out in this open stuff, as you'll see, they're very hard to stalk, even with the grass being long right now. Well, stalking them in the long grass is okay, but getting a shot was harder. In any case, it's time for me to get myself organised and haul this meat out, and potentially cut a little bit of firewood on my way back to camp, or chase some goats around with my bow. The general ideas you need to take away here, guys, are keeping your hands clean and keeping that meat as clean as possible. And it's also worth noting that this isn't just the case when dressing out ruddy fallow bucks, it's actually the case when dressing out any wild animal or any domestic animal for that matter. Sometimes I have the opportunity to knock the guts out of a deer and take them to a cool room hole and hang them for a little while. It's often a little easier to take care of the meat and easier to keep everything clean, because skinning out a deer that's hanging up is easier to do a clean job in a lot of ways than doing it on the ground. But plenty of what we eat is done on the ground, and if you can master that, or at least get more confident in that, and you're keeping things clean and you're doing the right things, then everything else will come much easier. Thanks for taking an interest in this video and my other videos in general. If you're keen to see the next few videos about the gear I use in the field and in the kitchen, then hit the subscribe button so you're notified when they come out. If you don't like to subscribe or you don't care to do that, that's fine. Keep an eye on the socials where you saw this video pop up, and you'll see me drop the next few ones in the future. Cheers.